In case some of you did not hear this news, that Chad, Watchman on the Wall 88, posted a couple of days ago, and he got the notification from Chelsea Bedell. And I'm regularly on Israel 365 News, but that day I was working on something else about the Cedars of Lebanon, and this article had come out about Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz wrote this article May 6th, 2022, and it was some very prophetic news. And I just wanted to say, you know, Gershon Solomon, who runs the Temple Mount Faithful movement, I had the opportunity to meet him, I believe it was in 2006, right before God gave me my first divine revelation that started my book, The Almond Tree, Aaron's Rod, the Messiah, King of Israel. When I had the opportunity to meet him, he was considered very controversial because in 1990 he tried to lay a cornerstone for the third temple, and the Arabs rioted, and something like 17 rioters were shot and killed. And he was not allowed to go up on the Temple Mount for nearly 30 years, 28 years, or something like that. So he was just allowed to go up in a wheelchair in 2019. The first cornerstone that they had displayed on the back of a flatbed semi, that was laid in a square somewhere around some streets in a circular, you know, one of those circular drive things. The rock was right there. It was something that was naturally carved, I believe, from what I remember. And that one was stolen. I don't know whether they ever got that one back, but there was another one that he had shaped with a diamond saw so that it didn't have an iron tool implement used on it, since that is the rule of building the temple. So this situation that's going on is very interesting, that Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz posted this in Israel 365 about the Jews begin building third temple on Israel Independence Day. And it says, while most Israelis were celebrating Independence Day by having family barbecues, a small group gathered in the old city of Jerusalem. That's where my almond tree sprouted, by the way, on the Temple Mount in the old city. And they began chipping away at stones, preparing them to be used to build the prophesied third temple. The event was organized by Rabbi LIPO, who envisioned it while on his way to the funeral of Rabbi Kanifsky in March. LIPO ascends to the Temple Mount on a daily basis when the Israeli police permit Jews to enter, but was deliberating with a friend which was more important, to attend the funeral of a tzaddik, righteous Jew, or to ascend to the Temple Mount. To honor Rabbi Kanifsky, he and a friend were learning a halakhic Torah law ruling written by Rabbi Kanifsky, in which he stated that the stones for the temple had to be cut by Jews with the intention of honoring God's name. We have a mitzvah, Torah commandment, to build the temple. This mitzvah is not conditional or time-bound. We have this requirement at all times, so it is a pity that we are not actively engaged in it. Right now, it is politically complicated for us to begin building on the Temple Mount, but that does not exempt us from this mitzvah. Rabbi LIPO realized that it was possible to begin to actually perform this mitzvah by preparing the stones that will be used to build the third temple. He explained that the medieval Torah authority known as Maimonides, or by the acronym Rambam, taught that the stones for the temple building were cut outside of the Temple Mount and transported to the Temple Mount, Once on the Temple Mount, it was forbidden to use iron tools to form the stones. It was, of course, forbidden to use iron tools at any stage to form the stones for the altar. As an aside, Rabbi LIPO has already begun collecting stones for the altar. Rabbi LIPO cited Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who in 1937 wrote an article relating to Ezekiel's vision of the Jews' return to Zion, which says in Ezekiel 36:26, "And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your body and give you a heart of flesh." There are hearts and there are hearts, Rabbi Kook wrote. There are human hearts and there are hearts of stone. There are stones and there are stones. There are silent stones and there are stones which are hearts. I find that incredible because my mom and I one day, we saw this heart-shaped rock that was about as big as my hand, and it was very clearly a heart. And Mom put it in reverse and went fishtailing backwards to get this rock. It was so funny, we laughed about it a lot. But I took this heart-shaped rock and put it in my garden in a specific spot that was where my little kitty had fallen down on his last days. And so I was just putting my heart-shaped rock there that became such a symbol of things that were in my book. And that rock is actually in my book with some really cool special effects. So I just think this is really neat that he mentions there are stones which are hearts. These stone remnants of our dwelling on high retain their holiness even in desolation. Megillah 3:3. For the Shekinah has never left the western wall. They say Shekinah and we say Shekinah, so just so you know. These stones are our hearts. And Joshua Wander is the one who took the cutting stones for the third temple photo. So I want to give credit to Joshua Wander. In order to perform the mitzvah properly, Rabbi LIPO had to consult with several rabbis who were expert in issues concerning the temple. Because of its politically sensitive nature, an aspect some rabbis consider when ruling about the Temple Mount and Third Temple, there are normally vastly divergent views regarding such issues. All of the rabbis we consulted agreed that we should begin preparing the stones, LIPO said. This wasn't just a physical action to produce dressed stones. We had to be very careful about our intentions. Of course, this was not a political statement. The intention was to unify the Jews and all of the world in making God one and his name one. You know, there's that scripture that says in that day that his name will be one. It was for this reason that they chose to begin forming the stones for the third temple on Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. Rabbi LIPO cited commentaries that explained that when God appeared to Moses at the burning bush, he told Moses that the reason for bringing the Jews out was in order to serve him in Jerusalem. And he said, "I will be with you. That shall be your sign that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt," I might add that we're slaves, because that's going to lead somewhere, "you shall worship Hashem at this mountain." And that's Exodus 3:12. The unifying identity of the Jewish people is expressed in the temple in Jerusalem, Rabbi LIPO explained. On this day, 74 years ago, Israel became a state, but the essence of the nation is the temple in Jerusalem. Most quarries in Israel are operated by Arabs, and they preferred not to use stones from those locations. They collected 23 sizable stones from a field near the community of Aish Kodesh, Holy Fire, in Samaria. a contractor from Judea, transported the stones to an area near the Herva synagogue in the Old City. LIPO's mother, who was born with the state of Israel 74 years ago, took part enthusiastically helping to chip away at the stones. Can that be part of what's meant by this generation shall not pass away until all these things come to pass? Because she was born at the time Israel became a nation, and here she is chipping away at the stones for the third temple. A temple that hasn't existed in 2,000 years since the death, burial, and resurrection of Israel's king, Messiah, YESHUA. LIPO plans on holding more events of this type to prepare more stones for the third temple. Joshua Wander took part in the event. While cutting the stones, Wander wore tefillin, phylacteries, and had his sidearm ready, personifying the prophecy of Nehemiah. As for the builders, each had his sword girded at his side as he was building. The trumpeter stood beside me, Nehemiah 4:12. And if you haven't read that story, it is it is really a thrilling, adventurous story about how Nehemiah came back and rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. This was an important act unto itself and a message to the nation as well as to the world. But it was also a message to Hashem, or God, that we were not just sitting around waiting for the Messiah, Wander told Israel 365 News. We had the intention to show that we are actively working to bring the third temple as prophesied and commanded. The current situation in which Israel is a beautifully developed country while the Temple Mount is under the control of the Palestinians is similar to the situation described by the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you to dwell in your paneled houses while this house is lying in ruins? Haggai 1:4. The Israel Bible explained a message that is equally relevant today. Addressing the Jews who returned to the land of Israel after 70 years of Babylonian exile, Haggai's mission is to motivate them to resume construction of the Second Temple. He begins by challenging them to reflect on their priorities and to consider what is more important, their comfort or God's. While they dwell in paneled houses, God's house lies in ruins. The Hebrew term for paneled is sefunim. According to some, the panels were made out of cedar wood. I just did the video about my cedar of Lebanon cones that were rare wood from the forest of God, and how they were part of the wedding canopy, the chuppah of the Messiah, the cedar wood. And of course the cedar panels were made out of cedar wood imported from Lebanon. Think of the timing of that. I did that video at random, what God was telling me to do for that day, and this article, as far as I knew, was not something I had seen, and I don't think it was up yet when I did my Cedar of Lebanon video. So this is just remarkable timing. He tries to break their complacency. Then it says, the stones are being stored for their intended purpose. So Joshua Wander filmed Rabbi LIPO chiseling these stones. And in this video, you will see Rabbi LIPO is using a chisel and a hammer. They're not supposed to use iron, so I was looking up, hammers are made out of steel usually. And when I looked this up to see what they were technically made out of, including the chisels, they're made out of high carbon steel. And it says, what types of steel are chisels made from? Builders and cold chisels are normally made from tempered steel. For a cold chisel, the steel normally has a carbon content of approximately 0.875%. Under certain circumstances, cold chisels can also be made from beryllium, copper, or aluminum bronze. So the main steels used to make hammers are 4140 or 4340 and 1045 steel. If you are making a hammer in your forge, you may want to use 1045 steel due to its simplicity and convenience. It says that cold chisels are one of the few hand tools made for working with metals. So it's probably a different type of chisel. It also talks about carbon steel and boron steel. Not in the article, that's just looking up what the hammers and chisels are made out of, just kind of verifying that that's not an iron implement being used to hammer and chisel, since they are not to use iron implements to shape the stones. Of course, Gershon Solomon used some sort of diamond-tipped saw to cut the cornerstone that he did many years ago. So he had the approval of many rabbis. That was kind of kept secret for a long time, you know, between him and the rabbis. And this name can be either pronounced LIPO or LIPO. So I'm not certain which one he uses, but I did want to show Joshua Wander's video clips of the chiseling. So the copyright credit goes for these video clips of the chiseling of the third temple stones to Joshua Wander. Let's take a look at this. It's pretty exciting because all of this is an indicator that we are so close to the resurrection and rapture event. This was the first still photo of the stones that they were chiseling. This was posted by Joshua Wander. Keep in mind that what you're seeing has not happened in 2,000 years, and you are witnessing it.
לשם ייחוד קודש בריחו שכנתי הריני מקבל עליי מצוות ואהבת לרעך כמוך ומצוות ואהבת את השם אלוקיך הנני מוכן ומזומן לצטט אבני חולין לשם מצוות בניין בית המקדש השלישי לעשות נחת רוח להשם יתברך לקיים מצוות עשה ועשו לי מקדש ושוכנתי בתוכן ובתנאי בראש האבנים חולין ואין ההקדש על פי הכלל בונים בכל ואחר כך מקדישים ובלי נדר אם ירצה השם רק בעת הבניין תוקדשנה ותשובצנה במקומן בבית המקדש או בסביבותיו בהתאם לצורך בית הדין לב טהור ברא לי אלוקים ברוח נכון חדש בקרבי ענה השם כשם שאנו מסתירים אבן זו לכבודך כך תסיר בליבנו מחלוקת, שנאה, קנאה ותחרות ותן בליבנו אהבה, אחווה, שלום ורעות והפוך לנו לב אבן ללב בשר, לב טוב ואוהב מלא ברגישות, בזולת ואהבת חינם ונהיה כל ישראל מאחדים כאיש אחד בלב אחד ליבנו שוכן השם אחד בבית המקדש יבנה במהרה בימינו אמן יתקיים בנו ונתת לכם לב חדש ורוח חדשה אתם בקרבכם והסירותי את לב האבן מבשרכם ונתתי לכם לב בשר בזכות הכנת האבנים הללו קיים לנו הבטחתך ביד הנביא חגי שמיום שום אבן על אבן שום אבן על אבן בהיכל השם, תברך את עמך ישראל. למן היום אשר יוסד היכל השם שימו לבבכם, מן היום הזה אברך. ודברך לנביא יחזקאל וידעו הגויים כי אני השם מקדש את ישראל, להיות מקדישי בתוכם לעולם, אמן.
Now, I just want to inform you of something really significant. After seeing this and knowing that they are already preparing these stones and the building has begun, we're no longer waiting for that to happen. We know that this is a huge sign in historical events, especially prophetic events. And I want to tell you here, I was doing some research about some other things that I'm going to do in the next video, so I hope you'll stay tuned because there's some really interesting details that might reveal things to us in further detail to understand the events that are about to take place. You know, it says that Noah entered the ark on a certain day, and that day was the 10th of Heshvan. And sometimes it's called Mar Heshvan. And the Mar means bitter. So the flood, the judgment, came after they entered the ark, and the flood took them all away. So in this same month, this is the month, Heshvan, that King Solomon finished building the first temple. Now, which month is this? We have usually in September, either the beginning or middle or the end. But what we would have is the Feast of Trumpets in September, and preparing your heart to get right with God and dealing with the time of the day of the release of the servants. Now, this is what I'm going to talk about in the next video, because if I put it here, it'll be too long of a video, and I want you to stick around and hear this. But King Solomon finished building the first temple in the 8th month, and September, October, the months kind of are like 2 months, and Tishri is the 7th month, and Heshvan is the 8th month, the one following the Feast of Trumpets. So, if the Jubilee year begins at the Feast of Trumpets because it's the start of the new year, and the Shemitah year, this is the Shemitah, supposedly, that Israel is letting the land lay untouched, plowed, and all of that. So the Jubilee, they say, will start in this next coming fall at the Feast of Trumpets. That's when the start of the new year is. And this lets us know that in truth there is an element of bitterness here as well. For although the temple was finished then, the temple was not dedicated until later, leaving the month bereft of a possible holiday. Despite the dedication of the first temple not being in the month of Mar Heshvan, the Midrash relates that the third temple will be dedicated in the month of Heshvan, or Mar Heshvan. Thus, not only will it not be a bitter month, on the contrary, it will be a month of rejoicing. May it be speedily in our days. So Solomon did not dedicate the temple, even though it was finished in Heshvan, and the building came to an end in that month. Instead of dedicating it then, he dedicated it like the next Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. So I find it extremely interesting that so many things are coinciding with this coming Feast of Trumpets in September, because, you know, if the Jubilee starts, and then they said that they would have 3 possible red heifer candidates by 6 months from now, and if you count that, that's exactly at the time of Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets. So that would mean the Jubilee would start, and the red heifer for the ashes that they used to purify, to prepare for the third temple, would happen at that time. And that would mean, since they're starting the chipping away of the stones right now, on May 9th of the year 2022, in May, we are in the month of Iyar, the one that comes after Nisan. Nisan's the first month, so we're in the second month, and in the year 5782. I think it's interesting that it says Heshvan, or Marsh Heshvan, is the month on the 10th that Noah entered the ark, and then the destruction came after that. And it says it's the month that the grass withers. So in 1 Peter, in verse 24, where it says, "For all flesh is grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of grass. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord endureth forever. And this is the word which by the gospel is preached unto you." So that's the month where the grass withers, because it's basically going into dormancy for the winter season. So this is very interesting, because it's really talking about the flesh dying and being like the grass that withers, and the flower that fades away and, is no more, that it dies. And the word of the Lord that's coming to rescue us, the living Torah, is forever. He endures forever, and he resurrects the dead. So this is very interesting to connect this. Now we know that the Messiah is the cornerstone of the heavenly temple, and that all of the foundations of the 12 tribes of Israel, they are actually the gates of heaven, named after them, and the foundation stones are the disciples of the Messiah, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And there is this prophetic event of this third temple, that Israel is supposed to build that temple to fulfill the last 7 years of the prophecy of the prophet Daniel. And all of his prayers, as I told you, had to do with restoring God's mountain, God's temple on the Temple Mount area. Of course, there wasn't the platform of the Temple Mount in Daniel's day, but he was praying specifically for those things, as I told you in a previous video. And when you look at that, it's understandable, how this is all coming about. But let me just read this to you from TempleMountFaithful.org. Now, this is Gershon Solomon's group, and this is the activities he was involved in. And that event when he tried to lay this cornerstone in 1990 that caused the riots was why they did not allow him to go up onto the Temple Mount for something nearly 30 years. And just recently, he was allowed to go back up there in 2019 in a wheelchair. And he had a miraculous story about how an angel appeared to him when he was in this war, and some Syrians were coming to kill him, and he was run over by one of their tanks, and he was laying injured in the field, and this angel appeared to him and said that God was not finished with him, and that he was going to do something to help with this preparation of the third temple. Now, in the year 1989 to 1990, the Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful Movement dedicated an initial cornerstone in order to immediately start the building of the third Holy Temple on the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem with no delay. So I guess the moral of that story is you can't rush God's timing. It was the first cornerstone ever dedicated for the Holy Temple since the destruction of the Second Holy Temple in the year 70 AD. The faithful movement carried this cornerstone, weighing 6.5 tons, to the Holy Temple Mount in a very exciting and historical ceremony that was not seen in Jerusalem since the dedication of the first Holy Temple by King Solomon almost 3,000 years ago. Unfortunately, the government of Israel was not yet ready for such a major revolutionary and historic event. The government authorities gave us permission to carry the cornerstone only to the area of the southern gates of the Holy Temple Mount above the ancient city of David. We were forbidden to take the cornerstone inside the Holy Temple Mount in order to place it close to the foundation rock on the Holy Temple Mount on the location of the foundation of the first and second Holy Temples. The Supreme Court of Israel rejected our petition to locate the cornerstone inside the Holy Temple Mount. One of the judges asked GERSON Solomon, the chairman of the Faithful Movement, who anointed you to do this major event. GERSON immediately replied to the judge, the God of Israel, the history of Israel, the Israelis of the generation of the destruction, and also 200 generations thereafter, who were oftentimes taken to their deaths with the names of the God of Israel on their lips, and the deep desire in their hearts to see the rebuilding of the house of God. Even our generation gives me the authority to build the holy temple of God with no delay. 1,920 years of destruction, exile, and waiting for this moment are enough. Now, he said that back in 1989, 1990. And he said 1,920 years. So now you can add the years on to that, to the year 2022. Now we should fulfill the expectation of the God of Israel for his people Israel to rebuild his holy house with no delay in the lifetime of our generation. The story of this cornerstone has been very special, mysterious, and godly. It was the hand of God that directed GERSHON to a stone worker in Jerusalem by the name of Ezra Alafi. This special man made Aliyah return to his homeland of Israel from the exile of Babylon, today modern Iraq. When the Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful Movement decided it was time to start the building of the third temple, GERSHON visited Ezra Alafi's home in Jerusalem and asked him to contribute and prepare a large cornerstone. So isn't that interesting that this cornerstone was quarried by this person that came from Babylon and had lived there in Iraq, where Babylon and its remains are to this day. Makes me wonder if this has anything to do with mystery, Babylon the Great. GERSHON visited Ezra Alafi's home in Jerusalem and asked him to contribute and prepare a large cornerstone like the stones in the first and second holy temples. Upon hearing GERSHON's inquiry, Ezra almost fell from his chair. He could not even speak for some moments because of his great excitement, and his eyes filled with tears. When GERSHON asked Ezra why he was so excited, he answered, "My family members were workers of stone even before we were exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon." Wow! His family was exiled to Babylon? And he's the generation coming out of Babylon and back to Jerusalem to hopefully place this cornerstone. That's what they were hoping. A tradition that has passed along our family from generation to generation says that my forefathers were the builders of the second holy temple in Jerusalem, and that we shall be the builders of the third holy temple in Jerusalem as well. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is a Babylon connection. Oh, wow. That is stunning. That is just stunning. It is only the God of Israel who brought you here to me in order to fulfill this historic message within my family. You are here at my home not by accident. At that moment, GERSHON's eyes filled with tears. And he found himself thanking the God of Israel for this most incredible and godly experience that he would never forget for the rest of his life. For Gershon, this experience with Mr. Alafi was a remarkable confirmation that it is the God of his forefathers who called Gershon to build his holy temple. Both Mr. Alafi and Gershon thanked God from the bottom of their hearts for this major privilege and moment in their lives. The next day, Ezra Alafi went to his quarry in Mizpah Ramon. Now, that's the place, if you read about the prophet Jeremiah, when the Babylonians came in and took over Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, Jeremiah and the princesses of Judah, they fled to Mizpah at first. And then they were inquiring of God, and they went against God, and they went to Egypt, and they were not supposed to. God told them not to go to Egypt. So that's a whole other story. So let me read this again. The next day, Ezra Alafi went to his quarry in Mizpah Ramon, located on the Negev desert in southern Israel, to look for a special cornerstone and to prepare it for the third holy temple according to biblical law. So that has a connection to Babylon in itself, in the fact that Jeremiah the prophet was the one warning the king of Judah, the last king to reign from the Davidic line. They fled there when the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem, and it's just so incredible. So that was their safe haven there. And this is where they went to look for this cornerstone in a quarry. I just think it's incredible. Let's see. The biblical law prohibits the use of iron or any other kind of metal in the construction of the holy temple of God. So there, that would kind of indicate that you're not supposed to use any kind of metal. But I knew about the iron, so I don't know how or what they're doing with their tools there. Again, in a very mysterious way, there became no need to prepare the special cornerstone. Mr. Alafi discovered a large natural marbled stone covered with beautiful natural gold, ready to be the necessary cornerstone of the third holy temple. It seemed like this stone, anointed by God himself, had waited 1,920 years to become the chosen cornerstone for the third holy temple and the catalyst for the building of the third temple. By the way, the title of this article is "The Cornerstone is Ready." So it's been ready for a lot of years now. During the Sukkot festival, Feast of Tabernacles of that year, we carried the cornerstone on a truck in a very special ceremony that started at the western gate of the Holy Temple Mount and continued to the upper area of the city of David, near the southern gates of the Holy Temple Mount. These gates were historically used by Israeli pilgrims to enter the Holy Temple Mount for worship during the Sukkot festival. Gershon anointed a high priest and several Levites to follow the cornerstone in order to anoint it. The Levites played biblical music and songs, especially from the Psalms. The cornerstone was covered by a chuppah, the wedding canopy, made from Israeli flag showing the Star of David. Gershon dedicated the cornerstone. It was during a similar festival of Sukkot that King Solomon dedicated the first holy temple in a very special ceremony not far from this exact location. From this place, King Solomon had taken the Ark of the Covenant from the tent of David and carried it to be placed in the Holy of Holies of the first holy temple. It is also incredibly exciting to know that some years after our event, at this same exact place, the Israeli archaeologist Eilat Mazar, she's now deceased, unfortunately, and I was really hoping to meet her one day. but she discovered the historical and biblical palace of King David. And actually, I sent her some information and showed her on a photograph something, and it goes into detail about it. So whether she ever read that, I don't know, but I was trying to show her something, and that seems to be the area where she found this palace. Nobody knows this except me, and so I don't know what happened there, but it was pretty fascinating. And Gershon recited the same prayer of King Solomon when he dedicated the first holy temple almost 3,000 years ago in 1 Kings 8:12 through 53. The Levites prayed and played music as they did in the holy temple. Gershon also prayed the word of God to our generation. And he says here, "Then the nations shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel when my temple shall be in the midst of them forever." And when I looked up when the temple was dedicated, it said that it was dedicated at the time of the Feast of Trumpets. But he's saying that it was dedicated at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. Later, the ceremony with the cornerstone continued down into the city of David to the pool of Hezekiah in order to conduct the traditional ceremony of the water libation with water that was taken from the pool to be poured on the altar and accompanied with prayers for a rain-filled and blessed winter in the land of Israel. After this historical ceremony, the cornerstone was taken to an area not far from the Holy Temple Mount to await the moment that it can again be taken to the Holy Temple Mount to be laid in the area of the first and second temples and start the process of the rebuilding of the third Holy Temple. Now that sounds pretty logical, that he anointed the stone with the water that, they took the priests, and King Solomon was anointed there at the Gihon Spring. However, let me be clear, there has been some major wrong, I don't know how you put it, but there was a book put out by Bob Cornuck stating that the temple was in the city of David, and that is not where it was, not at all. And I actually have in my book where the Lord laid it out in an incredible secret way where it was built. And I can tell you that it's pretty exciting what the Lord revealed, and I truly believe it's the real location of the place of the temple. It's something stunning. However, when the truck tried to unload the heavy cornerstone at that place, the driver could not do it. It looked like the cornerstone was refusing to enter this place. Suddenly, the cornerstone fell down on the street and made a huge hole. We decided to leave it at that place temporarily so that everyone could see the cornerstone. On the following day, a description of the event of the dedication of the cornerstone was published, together with its picture in all the headlines of the media in Israel and also in the international media. The cornerstone gained international recognition. After a few weeks, when we came to move the cornerstone and to place it in one of the central plazas in Jerusalem, we discovered the cornerstone had disappeared. We did not find it in the same location where it had fallen. We immediately began a search for what happened to the cornerstone. Ezra Alafi discovered that the stone had been moved by the municipality of Jerusalem to the same plaza that we had originally wanted to locate it. All of these events appeared very mysterious. When we found the government workers of the Jerusalem municipality, they shared with us even more exciting and mysterious information. They showed us a photograph of the cornerstone still laying on the street where it had fallen. On the photograph, they wrote, "This is a meteor that came from heaven." They were sure that the cornerstone came from nowhere and that it could only be a meteor from heaven. They did not know that it is the cornerstone of the third holy temple. The stone appeared to them so important, special, and mysterious that they picked up the cornerstone and moved it to a particular plaza very close to the old city of Jerusalem and the Holy Temple Mount. So here he's talking about that this cornerstone appeared to them to be so mysterious. And this guy from Babylon's coming back to Jerusalem and quarrying the stone. I mind that connection of being mysterious and being the cornerstone for the third temple is like mystery. Babylon the Great. Babylon being the guy that's quarrying from the quarry that's from Babylon, whose ancestors were led captive out of Jerusalem to Babylon, and they helped build the second temple and are supposed to build the third temple. Now I'm just piecing this together as God is revealing these things right as I'm reading this, because I did not read all of this when I started, when I was doing some research on this and finding this article. And I requote, all of these events appeared very mysterious. So, mystery. Babylon the Great. We became even more excited when we figured out that this was the exact plaza where we originally wanted to place the stone. We explained to the municipality of Jerusalem that this stone is the cornerstone of the third Holy Temple that the faithful movement wanted to place on the Holy Temple Mount. The entire story about the cornerstone became even more mysterious and godly. The municipality asked to leave the cornerstone on this plaza. We immediately agreed with one condition, that any time that we want to take the cornerstone and move it to the Holy Temple Mount, we will be able to do it. They immediately agreed to this condition. They told us that it will be a great honor for Jerusalem and that this cornerstone will be located in the meantime on one of the central plazas of Jerusalem. Both of us knew and agreed that every event connected with the cornerstone, since we initially came to Ezra Elafi, was followed by the God of Israel. We knew that the cornerstone was anointed and prepared by God, not only to be the cornerstone for the third holy temple, but even to be a call to his people Israel, that it is time to build this holy temple on the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And now here, all of these years have gone by, and now they're just now starting to build by chiseling these stones for the third temple that you just saw. First cornerstone since the destruction of the second holy temple in the year 70 AD opened a new age in the history of Israel and even of the entire world. Every day people prepare cornerstones for buildings, but no cornerstone in the world besides this godly cornerstone for the third temple in Jerusalem could shake the earth and open a new major period in the life of mankind. One cornerstone in Jerusalem for the third holy temple did it. The world media came to Israel in order to cover this extremely major event in the history of Israel and even in the history of the whole world. Religious, political, and cultural leaders and major figures from throughout the world came to be witnesses of this event. They met with the chairman of the Temple Mount Faithful Movement, GERSON Solomon. They blessed him, the faithful movement in Israel. They shared with GERSHON that the cornerstone and the soon building of the third holy temple have finally shown the world that God never ever replaced Israel, and that is a critical mistake to think so. The rebuilding of the holy temple and the cornerstone confirm biblical prophecies and reveal that God has a special plan for his people Israel to be a holy nation and a light to the entire world, and that from Zion will go out the word of the God of Israel to all the world. Real peace will come to the entire world only when the holy temple is rebuilt, and the Shekinah of the God of Israel dwells in his holy temple on the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem. God will reign from Jerusalem, and his Shekinah will cover all the earth like a great tower of light, and it will remove the darkness and will show the moral and godly way of life to every human being. The event of the cornerstone started the fulfillment of the end-time prophecy of Isaiah and Micah. And it's talking about, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For from Zion shall go forth Torah, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Since the year 1990, the Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful Movement has conducted other events with special ceremonies to carry the cornerstone again and again through the streets of Jerusalem. The cornerstone is always welcomed with great excitement and inspiration by the Israelis and foreign visitors alike. The cornerstone is presently located on a very special and historical biblical hill. On this hill was discovered, and not by accident, the tomb of the last king of Israel. He says this king was Antigonus, who was crucified by the Romans. Now that's kind of interesting, because the last king of Judah was supposed to be King Zedekiah that went to Babylon. He was carried off there. On this hill was also discovered the tombs of the two high priests who served in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. From the present location of the cornerstone, the Holy Temple Mount, and the exact location of the Holy Temple are seen very clearly. The Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful Movement will continue even more intensively with her holy work to build the third temple in Jerusalem. The day is soon to come. The project of the cornerstone for the third holy temple asks from us many additional expenses. Our plan is to continue to prepare additional stones for the Holy Temple. These preparations for the building of the third Holy Temple cannot and should not stop. Unfortunately, we have not the necessary funds for the task of preparing more stones for the third Holy Temple. Okay, so it goes on to say all of that. So then it kind of goes on for there, talking about, that they want financial help for preparing the stones and all of that, which they've really raised a huge amount of money already through the Temple Institute. Now let me just state right here that I don't agree with every way that Gershon interprets the way things are going to happen. He has visited churches, and I actually got to meet him, and it was kind of interesting and kind of funny, because all of these men were clamoring to be right up there and meet him, and yet he took the time with me, a woman, to speak with me, and had such a kind look in his eyes, and I just felt that God was with him. I just sensed it. And these men were telling me, your time's up, trying to push me out of the way so I couldn't talk to him. But God just let me have all the time I wanted. And I felt like my miracle started the year after I met him, revealing all of these things, including where it was revealed where the location of the temple was. And believe me, it was not in the city of David. That is not true, and I can prove it many different ways. If there ever was anything down there that resembled any kind of temple, they were worshiping false gods. They were setting up altars to false gods. So whatever they found could definitely have been the remains of some sort of abomination type of temple, but not where the temple was located. So it's kind of fascinating, because years later, after I had met him, when I was awakened from my sleep and God had revealed something to me about the almond tree and some details with it, I woke up and it was just like a light went on inside of me. I mean, it was like an electricity. That's the best way I can describe it. And this stuff was being revealed to me, and the Holy Spirit was impressing me, send this message to Jerusalem, to his office immediately. And when I did, he didn't get the message. somebody else got the message. And that person had just been taking a walk at the same time in the old city of Jerusalem and passed by an almond tree that was just budding and blooming. It was the middle of winter here. And I had this astonishing thing happen. There's more to the story. It goes into depth in the book a little bit that I wrote, and but this is how it happened. And she said that the third time she tried to pass by that tree, somebody very powerful was like they pulled her by the arm and took her over to the tree and said, "Take a picture of the beautiful tree." So when this person got back to the office, opened up my email, they had no idea that I was clear over here in Colorado, and I had this revelation from the Lord about the almond tree. So she had the picture of the budding almond tree, and she said, "As soon as I read your email, I knew that this was for you from God." And it was, oh my gosh, you can't even believe how I felt. It was just, God was orchestrating the entire thing. When it came time for me to need a couple of pictures of the second temple, I contacted GERSHON, and he gave me a couple of the pictures he had of the second temple, and they're in my book, and they came from GERSON SALOMON. Now, I believe that he's Jewish, and I don't believe that he is a Christian, although he toured around speaking to Christian churches. But some of these people secretly do believe that Jesus is the Messiah, just like Joseph of Arimathea, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, and he believed that Jesus was the Messiah in secret. And part of the reason why they're not letting it be known that they already believe is because they know that this fulfillment has to take place exactly as God laid it out in his word. So I don't know what happened with that stone, but I did remember reading about another stone that was cut with a diamond saw. It sounded like they still had that stone and that it was mysterious. I just wanted to show you what a cornerstone looked like. It's the thing that all the other stones are built on, and this is laid as the corner. Now they posted that picture and said this: "Is Sukkot 2015 going to be the beginning of the building of the third holy temple?" The Temple Mount Faithful Movement marched on Sukkot 2015 to the Holy Temple Mount to make this a reality during this special year. So the Hebrew year was 5776. It says 2015 to 2016. Indicates a very special time with major events in the history of Israel. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon built the first holy temple and dedicated it for the God of Israel on the festival of Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles. And I just read you the whole story about in the year 1990, 25 years ago. This is from the time of 2015. So the very year that my book was published, Revealing the Messiah, the Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful Movement marched on Sukkot, the 30th of September 2015, to the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem in order to make this year not only a year of memorializing these two major events in the history of Israel and her capital, Jerusalem, but also to make it the year that the cornerstone for the third holy temple that the Temple Mount Faithful Movement dedicated for the third temple to be laid on the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and will begin the most major event of our time, the building of the third temple, and will make the dream and hope of the Jewish people a reality. And he thought in the year 2015. So here we are in 2022. So those are all ready to go, and now they're chiseling the stones that will be laid upon the cornerstone, like I showed you in that picture of what a cornerstone actually looks like in the corner of a building. A lot of times the cornerstone has, like a time capsule type thing that they put in it, and it has important memorial type things in it that kind of tell about the history, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if they did something like that, something historically important. I'm telling you all this, and I'm excited because this is showing that because these stones are being chiseled up there right now from Israel's Independence Day, that the resurrection rapture of Jesus Christ the Messiah is very close. And this is what excites me. He has a spiritual temple, and we are all like living stones that are set upon him as the chief cornerstone. The spiritually heavenly temple. He's going to take us up to be where he is. Meanwhile, Israel has to fulfill what was left from them going to Babylon in Daniel's prophecy, the last week of 7 years, the time of Jacob's trouble. And this is the temple that is going to be in the fulfillment of that until the Messiah descends from heaven and starts to reign and brings the dead that are believers in him along with rapturing us up and then bringing us down to be here with the Lord. And he's going to rule and reign on the Temple Mount, and he's going to be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords there, as he already is in heaven. Now we know that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and that Daniel the prophet, the royalty of Judah, interpreted the dream. And the dream was about the statue of all of these different nations that would rule and reign. And at the last, there's the feet of iron and clay that don't mix. And then this stone came down and ground the statue on its feet to powder. And then all the rest of it was crushed into powder. This is the stone that was quarried out of God's mountain, not made by human hands. This is the Messiah. This is Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the last and eternal King of Judah from King David's lineage. What does the Apostle Paul say in Acts 17, verse 24? God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. And I wanted to say real quick about that I realized that one day that he's not far from all of us or from each one of us. So when our loved one dies and it says absent from the body, present with the Lord, and the Lord is near to each one of us, then to me, the soul and spirit of our loved ones that have passed on are near as well. And I had a miracle happen with my mother. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but I was asking the Lord if she could see what I was doing. And there is such a great cloud of witnesses that are surrounding with the Lord, and their soul and spirit are coming back with the Lord in the cloud, and their bodies are going to come up out of their graves, and we're going to meet them in the glory cloud. So they are this great cloud of witnesses, and they do see what's going on. They see what's going on the earth, and they are very near, probably closer than we even know. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly, these times of ignorance of God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man, capital M, who he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. And the him is capitalized. That's the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." So Paul departed from among them. However, some men joined him and believed. And some of these people, it gives their names. So listen to what Jesus actually said to the chief priests and scribes. He said, "Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those vine dressers and give the vineyard to others." And when they heard it, they said, "Certainly not." Then he looked at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Whoever falls on that stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder." And the chief priests and scribes that very hour sought to lay hands on him, but they feared the people, for they knew he had spoken this parable against them. Again, we see in Matthew 21, in verse 42, Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder." Now, this is fascinating, because where was that to be found in the scriptures that Jesus the Messiah was telling them? It's in Psalm 118, which happens to be the Hallel, part of the Hallel. And this is the song they were singing after Jesus and the disciples went out after the Passover Seder, before he was crucified, and they went to the Garden of Gethsemane singing the Hallel. And part of what they were singing is, "This is the gate of the Lord, through which the righteous shall enter. I will praise you, for you have answered me, and have become my salvation," my YESHUA. "The stone which the builders rejected," YESHUA is the stone that the builders rejected, "has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." So they were actually singing this on the way to the Garden of Gethsemane, that Jesus, YESHUA, is their salvation, the stone that the builders rejected, which has become the chief cornerstone of the heavenly temple, upon which we are built as believers in the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Look what the prophet Daniel said about the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2, starting in verse 31. "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image, this great image whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron, partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." So the Messiah is the stone that came to life in God's mountain, holy Mount Moriah, and he is the one that doesn't need to live in temples because God is everything. And so in the Garden of Eden, there was no temple. It was just the divine presence of God that was there. And this is how it's going to be when he returns to rule and reign in Jerusalem. These are incredible events that are prophetic in our time. And we are so close to seeing the resurrection of the dead in Messiah and the rapture of believers. And this temple that Israel has to complete their part of Daniel's prophecy of the last 7 years in the latter days. And then the Messiah will come and crush all of these things and these kingdoms, and he will rule and reign. And it will be as it was in the Garden of Eden again, with the Lord God dwelling in our midst. And he will be our God, and we will be his people. And it'll be an awesome time. God bless you for watching. And I hope you stay tuned for the next video. Thank you for your support and love. I greatly appreciate it. And I will see you